I think the Vietnam War drove a stake right into the heart of America. Unfortunately, we've never moved really far away from that, and we never recovered.
There was no way we could avoid telling this story. Wars are so extraordinarily revealing, obviously, of the worst of humanity, but as it turns out, also the best of humanity.
There's been a lot done about this subject. Books, documentaries, feature films, novels. I mean, it's not like no one's ever tried. But it remains this kind of unfinished business in American history.
So it's time now. The decades have passed, and it's important now to go back and try to understand it.
Hello, Ken. Hello, Lynn. Thank you so much for being here today. I got a chance to see this amazing documentary that you both produced, and I understand that it took 10 years to complete this documentary called The Vietnam War. First of all, can you share with our viewers why the title of The Vietnam War?
The Vietnam War for Americans is the most important event in the second half of the 20th century, but we wanted to tell it in a different way that brought in all the different sides. You know, there were three countries involved here. The United States isn't alone in this struggle, North Vietnam and South Vietnam, and it's also about the loss. One of those countries disappeared, and that's a story that people don't rarely hear about, and we wanted to be able to tell the story from every perspective.
And I understand that you did go back to Vietnam a couple times to conduct the interviews. Can you share with the viewers the process of going back there, your experience talking to these North Vietnamese generals?
We really wanted to show, as Ken was saying, this war from every side. So when we went to Vietnam, it was really a sense of trying to talk to the sort of ordinary people, not just the high-level officials, to tell us what the war was really like for them, civilians and soldiers, and to really understand the human dimension of this really cataclysmic tragedy for everyone on all sides. And we had the same process that we do here when we go around and talk to veterans, American veterans or South Vietnamese who came here after the war, or people who protested the war. You know, there's many sides of the American experience as well. And we just went and got to know people and asked them, what was it like for you? What do you remember? What do you think about now? What do you want people to know about what you went through? And we had the same experiences there that we had here.
War is an unbelievable thing that happens, that human beings in all cultures are engaged in. And to have the ability, for example, to take a little known to Americans battle that happened in 1962 called Ap Bac, and to be able to interview a South Vietnamese Marine, his American advisor Marine counterpart, and then the Viet Cong guerrilla on the other side of the hedgerow or the other side of the battle, helps you see the battle in an entirely different light. And you understand the human dimension, and you understand even the military dimension of it in a new way.
Can you share with the viewers the process, I mean the pre-production, the process of putting this together? Because I know it's not, of course, this arduous process.
It's you know, we can both answer this. It's a very complicated process, and a lot of it has to do with shedding at the very beginning all of your preconceptions, all of the things you think you know about the story, because you understand very early on, it's very humiliating that you know almost nothing. So you're engaging scholars, you're reading books, you're talking to people from diverse points of view, you're writing and you're shooting at the same time, you're collecting archives, and then finding a way to sort of distill that narrative into something that's coherent, that people will recognize, and as Lynn was saying, be able to put our arms around lots of different points of view. Now, in the American spectrum, there are, you know, gung-ho army people to people who knew at the very beginning that the war was wrong and protested from the very beginning. But we also found those extremes within a South Vietnamese and within a North Vietnamese community, and it was important, and the 10 years comes from having to try to figure out, is it 8 or is it 10? Is it each episode, is it an hour and a half, is it 2 hours? That was our struggle.
And we got to see a bit of Lyndon Johnson's conversation with his people at that time. What did you learn? What did you both learn after hearing all these conversations?
Wow, well, I mean, I think we both found, and not just us, but our editors, our producers, everybody was fascinated by this material because we really weren't familiar with getting this intimate look at our leaders and what they were thinking and how they talked constantly about the war and what to do about it. And we wished we had the same tapes from Saigon and from Hanoi. We would know a lot more about what was really going on in those places. But at least in Washington, you see that our leaders are really struggling with how to prosecute the war and whether it can be won. and why we are there, and this is a constant conversation. And they never seem to come up with a perfect answer to those really deep questions. And I thought that was revelatory to me, I think for most of us.
I agree. I think there's something very human about listening in on someone else's conversation when they don't think they're being listened to. Even though they knew there was a taping system, it's very clear they forgot. And it would prove, of course, President Nixon's downfall, but it's also, it has given us a human dimension, which is what you always hear when people's guard is let down. But as Lynn says, you can see that they are saying at the press conference one thing about Vietnam, promising the South Vietnamese people one thing, and then saying something entirely different. I mean, the disparagement of the South Vietnamese regime by President Nixon and Henry Kissinger was a revelation to me, because all of their public pronouncements were of unwavering support and you're our ally, and it was clear from these conversations that they could care less about the South Vietnamese, and that I think is going to be hard for a lot of people to really get there. I know it was hard for me to really reconcile the two things.
Combat is like crack cocaine. It's an enormous high, but it has enormous costs. And I think that we make a big mistake if we say, oh, well, war is hell. We all know the war is hell story. It is, but there's an enormously exhilarating part of it.
Tôi đã chứng kiến là phía bên Mỹ người ta mất, khi họ bị thương á, họ cũng kè với nhau, rồi họ cũng khiêng xác với nhau, mà họ khóc rất nức nở. Người Mỹ cũng như người Việt của chúng tôi thôi, cũng có cái tình thương bao la như thế.
Within the last 7 to 10 years, I've been hearing that the Vietnamese people, my dad's generation, they kind of come to terms and accepting that is the fact.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's very difficult for them to really accept because they trust the U.S. government at that time so much.
Promise is a promise. A public promise is a public promise. And you want, as an American citizen, I want the United States to honor its promises. But I'm also very much aware of the fact that American presidents, not just Nixon, but Johnson and Kennedy and Eisenhower and Truman, all said one thing and did something else or felt something else. And there were tapes for Johnson and Nixon that are damaging in the extreme, because they can say one thing and actually be acting from a different set of feelings. And that's, I think, important. And I think one of the things that comes through, you can sometimes read this in the cold, hard type of a history book and you go, oh, okay. But when you hear it, when you hear a voice and you hear a conversation between someone, you're right there as if you've got your ear to the door, or you've just about to walk into a room and you hear people talking and you stop and you hear what's going on. There's a sense that you're eavesdropping. There's something voyeuristic about it, and yet you're being given unbelievable information.
We hear them talk, and it's mostly about American interests.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what they're focused on,
Yes.
right?
Completely.
And so we're fighting a war to preserve South Vietnam.
Yeah.
They don't care.
But they don't really, they don't seem to care that much about the Vietnamese people the way that we would like to think that they do.
Right.
And so that's also hard to hear, I think, for an American, because we think we want to do the right thing and be, a cause for justice and freedom in the world.
Something noble.
Right. And, they're dealing with some big global calculus, a chess game.
And what we found out to a president is that their chess game had to do more with them getting reelected than it had to do with stopping communism on the other side of the world or helping the South Vietnamese government be successful. I'll give you an example, which is Nixon and Kissinger knew going in that if they won the presidency, they would have to get out of Vietnam right away. And if they'd accepted the terms in Paris when they entered, it would be better than what they got 4 years later, with a lot more human beings still alive and on the planet.
My dad's generation, they just finally kind of like accept that is the truth, because for years I understand they refuse to believe that is the truth.
Well,
they always believe the Americans are always on our side, the South side.
Of course.
Because we don't want communism spread down south.
No.
Of course, you understand the huge sacrifices that were made, the struggle to keep a country in existence, the country that was helping that happen, and the country that offered refuge. those are huge, important things, but what we learn when we study history is things are much more complicated underneath. Things are really roiling underneath, even though the surface may be calm and placid.
Yeah. One of my favorite scenes is that one of the North Vietnamese officers said, "There's no wins or losses during war, right? Only the one who never out in the field fighting."
Right.
What he's saying is the politicians.
Right.
Right.
Well, I mean, I think it's a tragedy.
Yeah.
And it's extremely traumatic for everybody involved, right? So how you remember something is maybe not what actually happened, because when you're traumatized in that way of horrendous losses, it's hard to, see clearly. Yeah. And at least we feel in our film we've been able to recognize and honor the fact that 58,000 Americans were killed and millions of Vietnamese, including at least 250,000 South Vietnamese soldiers and 1 million North Vietnamese and Viet Cong soldiers. And so the human toll, is enormous. And it's really important, we think, that everybody understands who sees this film that no one has the market cornered.
I had the opportunity to call my mother. And I said, you'll probably never see me again because everybody in my unit's dying. I probably won't be coming back. And my mother said, no, you're coming back. She said, I talk to God every day, and you're special. And I said, Ma, everybody's mother thinks that they're special.
When we approached the target, coming down from altitude, I remember my knees shaking. And I was saying, holy smokes, I'm going into war. This is war. Once we went in and they started firing at us, the fear went away. And then I got hit.